Keanu Reeves walked into a rundown bakery for a simple donut. He left with a secret that shattered everything he thought he knew. The coffee was bitter, the pastry tasted fake, and the two voices he overheard from the back, they weren't just employees. They were plotting to steal everything he loved. But why? Before we continue this incredible story, let us know where you're watching from. If you enjoy stories like this, subscribe to the channel because tomorrow we have another inspiring story you won't want to miss. The morning sun hadn't fully broken through the overcast skies of Silver Lake when Keanu Reeves stepped quietly out of his car. He stood across the street from a modest little building with peeling blue trim and windows fogged slightly with morning dew. The sign above the entrance still read Everglow Bakery, hand-painted in faded cursive, the E chipped slightly at the edge. It looked tired, a little forgotten, but to Keanu, it still meant something. He pulled the brim of his baseball cap lower and adjusted the drawstrings of his worn hoodie. No one gave him a second glance as he crossed the quiet street. A jogger passed by without noticing. A delivery truck rumbled in the distance. Everything felt still. Keanu paused at the bakery door. The scent drifting through the frame was faint, cinnamon, sugar, something fried, but it lacked the warmth he remembered. It didn't pull him in. It didn't feel like home. Still, he reached for the handle, pushed open the door, and stepped inside. A small bell chimed above his head. The sound was familiar, but something in the tone felt off. A step too sharp. The kind of detail you only noticed when the things that used to comfort you no longer did. The interior had changed. The walls, once decorated with hand-drawn signs and framed photos of customers, were now stark and minimal. The chalkboard menu had been replaced with a digital screen showing sleek but soulless icons. The scent inside was flat, sweet, yes, but lifeless. He walked toward the counter. A young man with a blank expression glanced up from his phone. His apron was clean but loosely tied. He offered a smile that barely made it to his eyes. "Morning," the employee said mechanically. "Welcome to Everglow. What can I get you?" Keanu kept his voice low, adjusting his tone to something more gravelly. "Just a chocolate glazed donut and a black coffee. Small." The employee nodded. "That'll be $5.50. Keanu blinked. "For one donut and coffee?" The young man shifted his weight and shrugged. "New pricing structure. Management's decision." Keanu handed over a $10 bill. The employee gave him his change without meeting his eyes and turned away. Moments later, Keanu took a seat in the corner, near the window but angled just enough to see behind the counter. The small round table was scuffed. The chair creaked when he sat. He looked down at the donut. It looked normal enough, glazed with a glossy coat, circular perfection. But when he picked it up, it felt dense. He took a bite. His heart dropped. The texture was off. Chewy, almost stale. The glaze tasted artificial. Too much corn syrup. No depth. There was none of the old richness. None of the subtle notes of real cocoa his aunt used to insist on. The coffee tasted burnt. Keanu chewed slowly, staring down at the plate, his thoughts turning heavy. Something was deeply wrong here. As Keanu sat in that corner booth, the voices from behind the counter drifted just far enough to reach him. The bakery was mostly empty. Only a couple of tired patrons nursing coffee, one mother with a stroller, and a man reading the paper near the window. The stillness gave sound more room to breathe. And what Keanu heard next froze him mid-sip. "Another dead morning," a voice muttered with a smirk. "At this rate, the old man's going to be begging us to take this place off his hands." Keanu stiffened. The voice was familiar. It belonged to Chad Ransom, the operations manager he had personally hired 18 months ago. Chad had come highly recommended. Sharp, ambitious, polite in emails. But something in his tone now was different. Cruel, detached. Then another voice answered, lower, with a cynical laugh. "That guy's too soft. keeps yapping about quality and tradition like we're baking for ghosts. That was Kyle Ortega. He'd been brought on shortly after Chad, meant to modernize branding, manage the front-end team. Keanu had met him twice. Slick talker, firm handshake, the kind who seemed trustworthy until you looked just a little deeper. "I showed him those doctored spreadsheets last week," Chad said, chuckling. "He looked like he was going to cry." "Beautiful." Keanu's pulse quickened. "Has no idea," Kyle said. "None. We'll rebrand it to something flashier, you know? Urban oven, neon signage, make it viral, triple our money in 6 months." Chad scoffed. "No more of this family recipe crap." Keanu closed his eyes, the donut in his hand forgotten. They weren't just neglecting the bakery. They were gutting it. He glanced toward the counter. Chad and Kyle stood just out of view near the back hallway, half shielded by a partition. Neither had seen him. They were too busy congratulating themselves. "I've got my guy from Crestline Capital looking at the books next week," Kyle added. "Once he confirms how bad it looks, we'll make our move." "And Reeves?" Chad asked, dropping the name like it meant nothing. "We keep feeding him the same garbage. Rising costs, labor shortages, TikTok trends. He'll fold." Keanu sat motionless, staring down at the crumbs on his plate. This wasn't mismanagement. This wasn't poor leadership. It was betrayal. The kind that ran quiet until it was too late to stop. The kind that used your own silence against you. He looked around the bakery, his eyes scanning the space. The paint on the wall had dulled. The pastry displays were half empty, stocked with bland, processed-looking treats. The old glass cake stand that used to hold his aunt's famous lemon rolls was gone. So were the community flyers, the tip jar filled with scribbled thank you notes, the framed photo of his aunt on opening day. Everything warm, familiar, human, erased. A lump rose in Keanu's throat. He hadn't just lost a good bakery. He'd lost something sacred. The bell above the bakery door chimed again. Keanu didn't need to turn to know who walked in. Her steps were slow, but unmistakable. Measured taps of a wooden cane on worn tile. He glanced over his shoulder and felt a pang in his chest. Mrs. Dolores Kimura? She was in her 80s now, still dressed in the same floral scarf and wool coat she wore every Sunday when his aunt used to save her a warm croissant by the window. Back then, she was a fixture, a gentle soul who had baked side by side with his aunt for years during charity fundraisers and local festivals. She was family, even if not by blood. "Morning, Mrs. K," Kyle said flatly, not looking up from his screen. "The usual, dear," she replied softly. "A lemon scone and jasmine tea. It'll be $6.75, Chad barked from across the counter. Keanu's brow furrowed. Mrs. Kimura hesitated. Her hands trembled slightly as she opened her small coin purse and began counting change. Quarters, nickels, dimes. One by one, her hands slow with age. She didn't complain. She never did. "Prices changed last week," Kyle added, not bothering to soften his tone. "You can't expect us to eat the cost." Keanu's jaw tightened. He watched as Mrs. Kimura quietly handed over her coins and accepted her small paper cup. There was no warmth in the exchange, no familiar smile, no "have a lovely day." She shuffled toward a window seat alone, lowering herself carefully into the chair. Her tea sloshed a little as she set it down. From the back hallway, Maria Alvarez, the longtime head baker, appeared briefly. Her apron was flour-streaked, her face drawn with quiet tension. She glanced at the counter, saw Mrs. Kimura, then disappeared again without a word. Not even a nod to the managers. Keanu understood. She knew. Maybe not everything, but enough. And she'd been surviving under them, probably trying to hold things together. He stood slowly, his coffee still half galled. He didn't want to cause a scene. Not here, not yet. He walked past the counter toward the door, his footsteps light, his face hidden beneath the cap. As he passed the register, he caught one last whisper. "By this time next month," Chad said quietly. We'll have the papers signed. Reeves will think it's his idea. Poor guy's too nostalgic to notice we've already gutted the place. Keanu pushed the door open and stepped into the cold morning air. Outside, the bakery's sign flickered weakly behind him. The air smelled like exhaust and burnt sugar. His breath caught in his throat, his hands curled into fists in his jacket pockets. They didn't just betray his trust, they betrayed her memory. This wasn't just a failing business. It was a dismantled legacy. And now, it was war. But not loud, not public, not yet. Because Keanu Reeves had learned something in all his years. If you want to win a war built in silence, you have to listen before you strike. That night, long after the last customer left and the chairs were flipped onto tables, Keanu Reeves sat alone in his car across the street from Everglow Bakery. The parking meter lights blinked red, casting a pulse across the hood of his vehicle. He wasn't wearing his hoodie anymore. This time, he wore something even more personal. An old flannel shirt his aunt used to tease him about for never throwing away. His mind was caught in a loop, replaying the scene from earlier that morning. The lifeless doughnut, the callous remarks, Mrs. Kimura counting coins with shaking fingers, and worst of all, the voices of Chad and Kyle as they carved his legacy into something disposable. It haunted him. He reached into the glove compartment and pulled out a brass key. The edges were worn smooth. It was engraved with a tiny letter E, faded but intact. He hadn't used this key in years. Everglow had once been more than just a bakery. It was sanctuary. He remembered being 10 years old, standing on a milk crate behind the counter, hands buried in dough as his aunt laughed and told him to trust the yeast, not the clock. The smell of real vanilla, the glow of the morning ovens, the sound of neighbors chatting over coffee. It had been a place where life felt safe. He bought it back then, not as an investment, but as a promise. When his acting career slowed and the world felt unsteady, he made a quiet decision. He didn't tell reporters. He didn't hold a press conference. He simply bought the deed from his aunt's estate and swore he'd keep it going, quietly, faithfully, for her. But now, as he stood at the back entrance in the cold, key in hand, he felt that promise shaking. He slipped the key into the lock. The click was soft. The door creaked as he pushed it open and stepped inside. The kitchen was dark, lit only by moonlight spilling through a small skylight above the prep tables. It smelled of cold grease and flour. The ovens were silent. The warmth was gone. He moved quietly through the space, reaching for the clipboard he once used during his late-night shifts. It was still hanging on the side wall behind the shelves, covered in dust, but still there. He took a deep breath and began counting. Flour, sugar, butter, vanilla extract, Belgian chocolate, cinnamon, nutmeg. He noted each item. Then he walked to the office, powered up the ancient desktop, and opened the digital inventory logs. The numbers didn't match. According to the system, they had used 30 pounds of Belgian chocolate that week, but only 5 pounds were missing from the shelf. The butter count was off by nearly half. He checked the vanilla. What was supposed to be real Madagascar extract was replaced by generic syrup. The containers were different. He knew the brand his aunt had always insisted on. These weren't it. And that's when he knew they weren't just failing, they were faking it. Keanu stared at the open spreadsheet on the screen, jaw tight, eyes scanning each column like a detective flipping through alibis that didn't hold up. The numbers weren't just off. They were manipulated. The logs showed daily outputs that didn't align with reality. Ingredients supposedly used were still sitting on shelves, unopened. Meanwhile, substitutions had slipped into places they didn't belong. He walked over to the dry storage area and began opening bins and containers. The cocoa powder was cheap. The labels peeled off, replaced with handwritten tags to mimic the original brand. The flour wasn't the high-gluten blend they used for their signature sourdough, but something mass-produced. Even the sugar bags bore labels from companies he'd never heard of. He reached for the laminated recipe cards his aunt had made years ago and tucked behind the spice rack. Still there, still preserved. He flipped through them, running his fingers across the creases. Her handwriting, looping and steady, brought a lump to his throat. Lemon scones, real zest, not bottled flavoring. Chocolate glaze. Dark couverture, double-boiled. Cinnamon rolls. Brown sugar folded, not sprinkled. He pulled a current batch card from the clipboard. The ingredients were altered, shortened. The instructions stripped down like they'd been written by someone who had never baked a day in their life. This wasn't a slip in quality, it was a deliberate erasure. He moved back toward the walk-in fridge and opened the door. The air hit him hard, sharp and cold. Inside, crates were stacked neatly, but the contents told another story. The cream was ultra-pasteurized filler. The eggs were liquid carton substitutes. There were trays of pre-made dough, sealed in vacuum packs, stamped with labels that read, "Frozen Inventory, Urban Prep Solutions." Keanu felt the name punch through his chest. Urban Prep. He remembered that from Kyle's conversation earlier. It was the company they planned to use when rebranding the bakery. He pulled one of the boxes out and inspected it. The logo looked new, modern, detached from anything Everglow stood for. His hands trembled as he set it aside. This was never about improving the business. It was about gutting its heart and selling its shell. He stepped out of the walk-in, hands coated in frost, thoughts spinning. His aunt had once told him that baking was the purest form of storytelling. You could taste honesty, feel love in texture, no care in a single bite. But now, every bite told a different story, one of deceit, and of loss. He looked around the kitchen again. The cracked tiles, the stainless steel counters she once polished with pride, the walls she decorated with poems clipped from old magazines. Most of those had been removed, sterilized, sanitized. There was almost nothing left of her here. Almost. Keanu reached into his coat and pulled out his phone. He didn't call anyone. He opened a blank note and began typing. Inventory doesn't match. Premium ingredients missing. Recipes faked. Investigate. Quietly. He paused, then typed one more line. Never before. Keanu placed the clipboard back on the hook, then took one final walk around the silent kitchen. Every footstep echoed slightly, as if the space had forgotten what it felt like to be alive. He stopped by the prep station where his aunt used to shape dough by hand. She had always believed in the feel of things. No machines, no shortcuts, just rhythm, heat, and heart. He reached into the drawer beneath the counter. The old rolling pin was still there, worn smooth, the same one he'd used when he was 12, flour on his shirt, and the taste of buttercream on his tongue. He remembered the way she used to an old folk tune he never knew the name of, only that it meant things were okay. That night, nothing felt okay. He turned off the screen, powered down the lights, and made sure everything looked untouched. The sabotage wasn't just evident, it was calculated. The numbers weren't sloppy, they were curated. Whoever was behind this wasn't careless, they were bold, and they believed he would never look this close. But he had, and now they had no idea he was watching. He stepped outside into the alley behind the bakery. The cold air pressed against his skin, but it couldn't numb the heat rising in his chest. He shut the door behind him, locking it with the same brass key he'd once used as a teenager, pulling double shifts. He stood still for a moment, listening to the silence of the city. Then he walked slowly back to his car. The streets of Silver Lake were still quiet. A stray cat darted across the sidewalk. A neon sign buzzed above the closed bodega next door. He slid into the driver's seat, his thoughts racing. Everglow wasn't just a business. It was the last living piece of a woman who had shown him how to survive when everything else was falling apart. When his family had fractured and the world turned cold, his aunt gave him heat, sugar, structure, and kindness. The bakery had been the one place where he wasn't that kid with too many questions and not enough answers. He had been her apprentice, her helper, her family, and now two men, strangers with smooth talk and empty promises, had turned it into a puppet for profit. They thought he was gone. They thought he didn't care. They thought... He pulled out his phone again. This time, he took a picture of the new supplier box with the Urban Prep Solutions logo. Then he opened his contact list and scrolled down to a name he hadn't called in over a year. Helen Carter. Accountant, trusted, old school. The kind who noticed when a single dime went missing from the drawer. He tapped the contact but didn't hit call. Not yet. First, he needed to gather more. Because this wasn't just about cleaning house. It was about proving the truth. And if he was going to protect his aunt's legacy, he had to be absolutely certain that every lie would be brought into the light. The sun hadn't yet broken through the marine layer when Keanu parked in front of a modest craftsman-style house tucked between two towering jacaranda trees. The lawn was tidy. The porch had wind chimes that clinked softly in the early breeze. A hand-painted welcome mat read, "Accountants count what matters." He stepped out of the car with a paper tray holding two coffees, one black, one with cream and one sugar, and a small bakery bag. Not from Everglow. He didn't want her tasting what they were serving now. He knocked twice. A few seconds later, the door opened a crack, then fully. There stood Helen Carter, gray hair in a tidy bun, thick glasses perched on the edge of her nose, and a cardigan that looked like it had lived through every financial season. "Well, I'll be," she said, eyes softening behind the lenses. "Keanu Reeves, you look like you haven't slept." "Coffee," he said gently, handing her the cup with cream. "And a cinnamon twist from Roscoe's? Figured you deserved the good stuff." She stepped aside without a word and let him in. The house was exactly as he remembered. Lined with neatly labeled binders, books organized by accounting categories, and a wall calendar filled out in perfect penmanship. Her office, set just off the living room, smelled faintly of lemon polish and printer ink. Keanu set the second coffee in the bakery bag on her desk, then placed a small stack of documents beside them. Inventory logs, recipe cards, supply receipts, and 3 photographs he had taken of the current ingredient labels. "I need you to look at something," he said. Helen sat down slowly, adjusting her glasses. "You still trust my numbers?" "Always have," Keanu replied. "That's why I came to you?" She scanned the first sheet, her fingers moving over the columns with practiced grace. Her expression began to change almost immediately, eyebrows knitting, mouth tightening into a thin line. "These are current records?" she asked. "Pulled them from the back office at Everglow. Last night." She opened a fresh yellow notepad and began scribbling figures. Minutes passed in silence, broken only by the occasional scratch of her pen or sip of coffee. "These suppliers," she murmured, tapping one receipt. "I don't recognize any of them. And the chocolate, that brand's not even FDA certified." Keanu pulled out his phone and opened the photos again. He slid the screen toward her. "Urban Prep Solutions," he said. "Ever heard of them?" Helen narrowed her eyes. "They're not on any approved vendor lists from previous years, and they're charging nearly triple the wholesale cost for low-grade ingredients." She flipped to the next page and frowned. "Here's the worst of it. Look at who signed off on the pricing approvals." She circled 2 names. "C. Ransom, K." "And the signature field?" Keanu asked. Helen flipped the page again, this time pausing, her mouth barely moving as she read. "Plea improved all of it." Keanu felt the weight of her words like a stone pressed against his chest. Keanu leaned forward, scanning the signature fields. The strokes were convincing, similar enough to his, but not his. Not even close. Helen slid a laminated copy of his official approval initials across the desk and placed it beside the printed forms. "Tape may traced it," she said, "or copied it from an old authorization, but you didn't sign these. I'd stake my reputation on it." He stared at the pages. a slow burn rising in his chest. His name had been weaponized, not just attached to poor decisions, but used to cover up calculated fraud. His silence had become their shield. Helen stood and moved to her file cabinet, pulling open the second drawer from the bottom. She retrieved a thick binder marked Everglow, Vendor Archive, and set it on the desk. Dust floated briefly in the sunbeam that cut through the curtains. "Let's compare," she said, flipping to a section of older receipts and supplier contracts from 2 years prior. Names he recognized filled the pages. Vendors he and his aunt had personally chosen, local farms, artisanal dairy companies, independent spice merchants. These people cared about quality, she said, and every single one of them disappeared from the books after Ransom and Ortega took over operations. Keanu nodded slowly. "They said I wanted to cut costs, push volume, go modern." Helen raised an eyebrow. "You? Push volume?" He gave a quiet smile, though it didn't reach his eyes. "Exactly." Helen turned to her desktop and began pulling up the bakery's internal database. Keanu stood behind her, watching the monitor as she navigated to the price adjustment records. "There," she said. "Right after they took full operational control, almost every item on the menu went up. 20% here, 30% there. And your aunt's lemon scone? 45% increase." He felt his hands curl into fists. "They raised prices, cut quality, switched suppliers, then told me the problem was labor." "Worse," Helen said. "They built a paper trail that made it look like you directed it." She opened a folder labeled Digital Correspondence Archive. "They used your name in internal memos," she continued. "See here? This one says, per KR's request, adjust ingredient sourcing to increase cost efficiency. And another, KR approved elimination of senior discount." "Did you authorize that?" "Never," Keanu said, voice low. Helen looked over the top of her glasses. "Then you've been set up, thoroughly." He sat back in the chair, his heart sinking deeper into his chest. He'd stepped back from the bakery to let it breathe. He thought he was empowering people, letting them grow. He thought they shared his values. But all he'd done was give them a blank canvas to forge their own agenda. And now, not only was the bakery falling apart, they'd built a case to make him the face of its failure. Helen placed a hand gently over his. "It's not too late," she said. "We can fix this." Keanu looked up at her, eyes steady. "Then let's begin." Helen leaned forward and clicked open the internal customer feedback system, an archive designed years ago to collect every compliment, complaint, and suggestion submitted in-store or online. Keanu had helped fund its setup himself, believing that listening to the community was just as important as baking the bread. The screen populated with hundreds of entries. Helen adjusted her glasses and scrolled. Line after line flashed by. Familiar names, neighborhood regulars, families, seniors, tourists. One after another. "My muffin was dry and hard as rock. Why are prices going up every month? Used to love this place. It feels different now. Cold. No one smiles anymore. Bring back the old blueberry recipe, please." Is Keanu still the owner? It feels like he gave up. Keanu's eyes traced each line. His breath caught at that last one. "How many of these were addressed?" he asked. Helen clicked the filter. Out of over 200 entries logged in the past 8 months, nearly all were marked resolved. "But there's no follow-up," she said. "No reply, no notes, no refund issued, just the box checked. It's like someone wanted to bury them." Keanu leaned closer, scrolling through names he recognized. Regulars, locals, people he used to chat with when he'd visit on quiet mornings. They'd spoken, and he hadn't heard a word. He turned to Helen. "They made it look like the customers didn't care. And like you didn't care either," she added. "That's the part that really burns." He looked down at the table, the weight of betrayal pressing on his shoulders like concrete. "They made everyone believe I had abandoned it." "You didn't," Helen said gently. They just turned your silence into their strategy. He inhaled slowly. He stood, walking toward the window. The jacaranda trees outside swayed in the wind, purple petals scattered along the sidewalk like breadcrumbs leading nowhere. He had wanted to build something that honored the past, but now it was being turned into a machine of deception. He turned back to Helen. I need copies of everything. Receipts, contracts, feedback records, pricing history, supplier switches, forged approvals, everything. I already started printing, she said. I figured once I saw the false signature, we were past the maybe stage. He smiled faintly. I'll need one more thing, he added. A record of every vendor who was removed, their names, contacts. I want to know who they were and if they ever said why they stopped working with us. Helen nodded. You're building a case. I'm building the truth. He gathered the papers she'd stacked on the edge of the desk. They felt heavier than their weight. He paused at the door. Thank you, he said softly. You were always the one person who caught things no one else noticed. Helen smiled. That's what accountants do, Keanu. We see what others miss. He stepped back out into the morning light, folder in hand. The bakery was no longer just under threat. It was in the middle of a quiet war. And now he had the first pieces of ammunition. Keanu stood just outside the rear exit of Everglow Bakery, a nondescript van idling beside him. The street was empty, the early hour cloaked in fog. Inside the van sat Marcus Lynn, an old friend from years ago. Former military intelligence turned private security consultant. Marcus didn't ask questions. He just worked with quiet efficiency, his hand steady as he set down a small case of equipment on the concrete ledge by the door. Nothing flashy, Marcus said. No blinking lights, no sounds. All motion activated. High-res cameras, embedded mics. Everything will sync to your private server, encrypted end-to-end. Keanu nodded once. Keep it discreet. They can't know. In under an hour, the two of them moved silently through the bakery. One camera was installed behind a decorative bread rack that hadn't been restocked in weeks. Another above the menu screen, near the register. A third was hidden in the hallway leading to the manager's office. Microphones were embedded into the molding along the back wall, where voices tended to echo and carry. A final one was tucked discreetly behind the bookshelf in the customer seating area. When they finished, Marcus handed him a small remote and a secure login sheet. Press this once when you sit down, it'll start recording. Keanu thanked him with a quiet pat on the shoulder, then locked the back door behind them. Later that afternoon, dressed in the same hoodie and cap, he returned to Everglow like just another face in the crowd. It was late morning, and the bakery had a slow but steady trickle of customers. Keanu took his seat in the back corner booth, same as before. From here, he could see everything: counter, cash register, seating area, and most importantly, the corridor leading to the office. He ordered a plain black coffee and sat with an empty laptop in front of him. The screen showed fake spreadsheets, but the real data was coming through his earpiece. Within the first hour, he had enough footage to make his stomach turn. An elderly woman stepped up to the counter, asking softly if the almond croissants had returned. Kyle barely looked at her. Not profitable enough, he muttered. Try something else. She blinked, hesitated, then walked away without ordering. 10 minutes later, Chad was caught quietly changing the till settings and pocketing a few small bills, mumbling something about rounding errors to the new hire. When the young girl looked confused, he waved her off. Another customer asked about a loyalty card stamp. Kyle rolled his eyes. Owner canceled the program, said it wasn't bringing in high-value traffic. Keanu felt heat rising in his chest. These weren't isolated incidents. This was culture, a toxic one. By the second hour, the whispers became louder. Keanu heard Kyle joking to a delivery guy, "This place is on its last legs. We're just giving it a push." Chad laughed behind the register. Sentimental fools still think homemade means something. Keanu kept his gaze low, pretending to scroll through emails on his laptop, but every word, every gesture was being recorded. The hidden mic in the baseboard beneath the register caught everything clearly. Even the clink of coins being mishandled in the tip jar didn't escape the sound feed. A young mother with a stroller entered and asked for a warm muffin for her toddler. Jaime, the cashier on duty, was about to help when Chad stepped in, intercepting the order. "We don't heat up anything special," Chad said flatly. "Buy it as is or leave it." The woman glanced at her son, then quietly paid and stepped aside, her eyes full of confusion. Keanu caught the brief flicker of regret in Jaime's expression before he returned to his station. Another customer approached, this time an older man with a veteran's cap. He asked whether the senior discount still applied. Kyle didn't even look up. "Gone. Policy changed months ago," he muttered. "But I was here last week," the man said gently. "Then you should have stocked up," Kyle replied. Keanu clenched his jaw, his hands resting still on the table. The moments were piling up, small yet brutal, each one eroding the very heart of Everglow. This wasn't just neglect, it was strategy. He took a sip of his coffee, bitter and burned. The taste fit the mood. A few minutes later, Chad returned from the back office holding a small folder. He opened it at the counter, laughing under his breath. Kyle joined him. "These are the quarterly numbers I prepped," Chad said. "Just look at how bad they look. It's beautiful." Kyle grinned. "We'll show them to Crestline next week. Make it look like this place is on life support." "And Reeves?" Chad asked. "Still thinks TikTok trends are the problem. We've got him in a fog." Keanu's fingers hovered above the laptop keys. He wanted to stand up, to say something, to tear down the lie right then and there. But timing mattered. Instead, he clicked the remote under the table, signaling the timestamp. That conversation would be tagged, stored, and used later. He turned slightly and caught Maria walking past the kitchen door, her eyes low, her face tired. She had heard too. She always did, but she never reacted. She couldn't afford to. Keanu knew that kind of restraint. It lived in people who loved something too much to let it break, but who were too powerless to stop it from falling apart. Another hour passed. Another dozen customers quietly discouraged. A child told he couldn't use a bathroom. A pair of teenagers turned away because they didn't look like buying types. Keanu had come in hoping for confirmation. What he got was something far worse. A business deliberately poisoned from the inside. The smiles were fake. The rules were shifting. And now, with cameras rolling and truth unfolding, he was no longer just watching. He was gathering proof of sabotage, of cruelty, and of a takeover plan hidden in plain sight. By late afternoon, the lunch crowd had thinned to a trickle. Keanu closed his laptop slowly, stood up, and tossed the untouched remains of his coffee into the trash. He gave a subtle nod to Jaime on the way out, one the young cashier returned with a puzzled, quiet glance. Outside, the light had shifted. The sky over Silver Lake was dusted with pale gold, and the faint hum of evening traffic was beginning to build. Keanu didn't head straight home. He drove 3 blocks east, parked in an alley beside an old record shop, and entered through a side door into a private workspace Marcus had set up for him. The room was dim, walls lined with monitors and a single server humming softly in the corner. Marcus looked up from the main screen and nodded once, the employee who dared to hold back. He said, "No," Keanu replied. "They didn't." He sat down, and Marcus began playing back the footage. Clip after clip, each more damning than the last. Customers dismissed, prices lied about, loyalty rejected, discounts denied. Chad and Kyle's smug remarks echoed through the speakers like nails in a coffin. Keanu sat through all of it, arms folded, face unreadable, jaw clenched. He paused one clip where Chad held up a fabricated expense sheet. "Look at that," Keanu said quietly. "They built an entire story, and they used my name as the villain. Marcus shook his head. They didn't just mismanage, they staged a collapse. Keanu leaned back and let the weight of it settle over him. Everglow wasn't failing. It was being killed on purpose. He stood and walked over to the monitor with the live feed still running. The bakery looked empty now, chairs stacked again, lights dimmed. A faint reflection of the neon sign from across the street pulsed in the window. "They think no one's watching," Keanu said. "And they're almost right," Marcus replied. "Except for you." Keanu turned back toward the recording desk and picked up the audio log. "I need everything saved, tagged, isolated. The worst moments especially. I'm going to need to show this to people who trusted me." Marcus nodded. "Already started." Keanu opened his notebook and scribbled down a short list. 3 names. People who had supported Everglow since day one. Community members. Former staff. He was going to speak with each of them personally. But first, he needed to see it all for himself. He played the last clip again. Kyle sneering as he told a young customer they didn't serve Instagram pastries. Chad making fun of Mrs. Kimura's voice. Then laughter. Cruel, hollow laughter. Keanu muted the screen and closed his eyes. This wasn't just theft. It was desecration. They had taken something built with love and twisted it into a performance of power, greed, and ego. And now he had the receipts. The cameras had spoken. The silence was over. Everglow had been his aunt's gift. Now it was his fight. And the reckoning was coming. The diner was old. Vinyl booths, cracked salt shakers, and a waitress who called everyone sweetheart without looking up from her notepad. It sat 2 blocks from Everglow Bakery, tucked into the corner of a faded strip mall where time seemed to slow down after 7 p.m. That's exactly why Keanu picked it. He sat in the corner booth near the window, watching the door with steady eyes. The air smelled of coffee and burnt toast. He didn't mind. It reminded him of simpler years, long before screens and statements and betrayal. At 7:32, the door opened quietly. Maria Alvarez stepped inside, looking smaller than he remembered. Her hair, usually pinned up under her flower-streaked cap, was pulled back into a loose bun. She wore a faded green sweater and jeans, her hands cracked from years of baking, sleeves pulled low. Her eyes scanned the room until they found him. Keanu stood, gave a small nod. She walked over slowly and sat across from him without a word. They didn't need small talk. Not tonight. He pushed a warm cup of chamomile tea toward her. She accepted it with both hands, fingers wrapping around the ceramic like it offered more than just heat. For a while they said nothing. Then she looked at him. Really looked. And her voice came out soft, barely above a whisper. "I didn't think you'd call." "I should have called sooner," Keanu replied. Maria glanced down at her cup, then back up again. "You were gone. I didn't know if you still cared." He nodded slowly, eyes steady. "I cared. I just trusted the wrong people to handle things. While I stepped back." She didn't answer. The silence was heavy, but not cold. Finally, she set the tea down. "I knew something was off months ago. The ingredients changed first, then the recipes. One day they told me we'd stop using real eggs, start using the liquid substitute. I pushed back. They said you approved it." Keanu's expression didn't change, but Maria saw it in his eyes. The quiet devastation. "I didn't," he said. "Not one change, not a single cut." She looked at him for a long moment. Then she nodded, almost to herself. "I didn't believe it, not really. But they showed emails, documents with your name on them. They said if I made a fuss, I'd be replaced. Told me I was stuck in the past, that you wanted modern efficiency, lower margins, trendier flavors." Her voice cracked slightly. She cleared her throat and went on. "Aimley told me to stop making the cinnamon braid. Said no one bought it anymore. But I saw the orders, I saw the customers asking. When I brought it up, they said I was being difficult, that I needed to adapt or retire." Keanu leaned forward, And you stayed anyway. Maria looked down at her hands. Because it wasn't about them. It was about the place. About what your aunt built. Keanu nodded slowly, his gaze fixed on Maria's face. You kept it going, he said softly. I tried, she replied, but they chipped away at everything. She reached into her bag and pulled out a folded slip of paper. It was worn, creased at the edges. She placed it gently on the table and slid it across to him. It was an old Everglow recipe card. His aunt's handwriting, faded but still legible. This was taped to the fridge in the back. For years, I used to point at it when training new bakers. Then one morning, it was gone. Kyle told me we were digitizing all recipes, but when I checked the system, it wasn't there. None of the originals were. Keanu opened the card and read silently. It was for the honey walnut loaf, a seasonal favorite they used to bake every fall. He remembered helping with that recipe when he was 15, standing beside Maria in the warmth of the kitchen, music playing from a radio in the window. He erased her, he said under his breath. Maria didn't respond. She didn't have to. I'm sorry they put you through this, Keanu continued. I never meant for any of it to happen. I know, Maria said. I didn't at first, but I do now. Keanu leaned back in the booth. The waitress walked by and refilled their waters without a word. They were grooming the bakery for a sale, he said, doctoring numbers, raising prices, switching vendors, all to make it look like Everglow was collapsing. Then they'd step in and offer a way out. Maria stared at him. They said you were tired, that you wanted to sell. I wanted it to thrive, Keanu said, but I gave them too much trust. She sat quiet for a moment, her fingers tracing the rim of her cup. I thought about quitting, she admitted. More than once. But every time I almost did, I'd see someone walk in and ask if we still had the old molasses bread. Or someone would ask about your aunt. Or leave a note under the tip jar. That's why I stayed. For them. You kept the soul alive, Keanu said. Maria looked up, her eyes suddenly bright. I did what I could. But I didn't think I had anyone left behind me. Well, now you do, Keanu replied. I'm not going anywhere this time. He reached into his coat and pulled out a thick folder. He placed it gently between them. What's that? Maria asked. Proof. Documents, statements, internal emails, footage. She hesitated. So what happens now? Keanu leaned forward. Now we stop them. She looked down at the folder, then back at him. Whatever you need, she said. I'm in. And for the first time since they sat down, a faint smile crossed her face. Not one of relief, one of resolve. Maria took a deep breath and pushed her tea aside. The cup was nearly full, forgotten. Her voice dropped lower, steadier. There's more I didn't tell you. I didn't know if it mattered until now. Keanu gave her time. About 4 months ago, they started pressuring the kitchen staff, she said, telling us to stop wasting time on artistry. They cut prep time in half, told us not to double-check measurements, said close enough was good enough. He frowned. What happened if someone pushed back? People he got hours cut, warnings. A few quit. Karen from morning prep got let go after 20 years. They said she stole a bag of flour, but we all knew that wasn't true. Keanu's jaw tightened. And no one reported it? Maybe made sure no one felt safe enough to, Maria said. And the younger staff? Most of them were scared to speak up. Kyle told them the bakery was going corporate, said new management didn't care about loyalty. Keanu sat back, absorbing every word. They've been laying the groundwork longer than I realized, he said. They wanted to gut it slowly so no one noticed until it was too late. Maria nodded. They got rid of anyone who remembered what Everglow used to be. He looked at her and held her gaze. But not you. No, she said firmly. Not me. He tapped the folder between them. I need someone on the inside. Someone who knows where the changes started, who they affected, who was pushed out and why. You want names? I want stories, he said. Real ones. I want the truth they buried. Maria's eyes didn't waver. Then you'll have it. Keanu exhaled slowly. You shouldn't have had to carry this alone. I didn't carry it for me, she replied. I carried it for her. He nodded. So did I. They sat in silence for a moment, surrounded by the low clatter of dishes and the soft hum of conversation around them. But inside that booth, something else stirred. A current of quiet determination. Keanu reached into his pocket and pulled out a small envelope. He slid it across the table. What's this? An employment agreement. New terms, new authority. Maria opened it slowly, her hands trembling just slightly. Head of kitchen operations, she whispered, reading. Full discretion over staffing, sourcing, scheduling. With retroactive back pay, he added. Effective immediately. She looked up, stunned. You're giving this to me? I'm giving it back, he said. Maria's eyes glistened, but she didn't let a tear fall. She closed the envelope, placed it carefully into her bag, then stood. Tell me what you need first, she said. He stood too. Help me find the people who stayed quiet. Help me bring them back in. Then we make a plan. Maria extended her hand, not to shake, but to steady him. Then we do it together, she said. Keanu gave a nod of quiet gratitude. They left the diner side by side. The war for Everglow had found its first ally. The message came late, just past 10 p.m., as Keanu sat at his kitchen table reviewing the surveillance timestamps from the bakery. It was a short text, no name, just a number Maria had passed along earlier. If you really want to fix this, meet me behind the bus stop on 8th and Vernon. I only have 20 minutes. Keanu typed a brief reply. I'll be there. He didn't change clothes. He didn't bring anything except his keys and a notebook. The streets were quiet as he drove, headlights slicing through the cool night air. He pulled into a parking lot beside an abandoned laundromat and waited. A few minutes later, Jaime LeBlanc stepped out from behind the old bus stop shelter. He wore his Everglow hoodie, sleeves pushed up, backpack slung low on his shoulder. He looked over both shoulders before walking up to the passenger side. Keanu unlocked the door. Jaime slid in quickly, glancing around the lot as he shut it. Sorry, Jaime said, voice low. If they see me talking to you, I could lose what's left of my hours. You're safe here, Keanu replied. Jaime nodded, still twitching slightly. His leg bounced, hands fidgeting in his lap. Maria told me you were the real deal, he said. Said you weren't just checking in to make a show of it. Keanu said nothing. He let Jaime speak. It started small, Jamie continued, tips going missing from the jar. I'd count it, mark it on the log like I was trained, and the next shift, always Chad or Kyle, would count less, like $10, $15 less. I thought I'd made a mistake, so I stopped saying anything. He paused, then added, but then it started happening all the time. Keanu scribbled something in his notebook, silently encouraging him to go on. I saw receipts disappear too, especially when people complained. Someone would say their muffin was dry or the coffee was cold, and I'd see the receipt just vanish off the counter. Kyle told me it was part of the new process to keep things streamlined, but I didn't believe it. Jamie's fingers tightened around his backpack strap. May told us you were selling the place. Said you were done with legacy nonsense and that Everglow was going corporate. That Maria was part of the problem. That she was clinging to old methods, making us inefficient. Keanu's expression stayed neutral, but his eyes were locked on Jaime. They may told us not to worry when customers complained, Jaime said. Said those types weren't coming back anyway. That we needed to stop catering to sentiment. Keanu finally spoke. And you? I didn't agree. But I needed the job. And they made it clear that anyone who pushed back would be phased out. Keanu looked at him carefully. Would you help me fix this? Jamie didn't even blink. Yeah, I will. Whatever you need. Keanu nodded slowly, the quiet confirmation settling in the air between them. I need someone who's seen what they've been doing from the inside, he said. Not just rumors, details, patterns, moments. Jaime took a deep breath and glanced down at his hands. His voice lowered. "There's more," he said. "I wasn't sure it mattered, but now I think maybe it does." "Go ahead." "A few weeks ago, I was asked to stay late and help with inventory. Not a big job. But they had me enter numbers into the system on Kyle's laptop. At first, I thought it was just regular back-end stuff, but the file was weird. It had 2 tabs, one called Actual and one called Adjusted." Keanu frowned. "Adjusted?" "Yeah," Jaime said. "That's the one they told me to edit. They gave me numbers to plug in, said it was just for optics. But when I looked at the other tab, the numbers were totally different. Like half the waste, lower supply costs, and higher revenue." Keanu's fingers tapped the side of the steering wheel. "So they're keeping 2 sets of books?" Jamie nodded. "I think so. But only that night. After I entered the numbers, Kyle saved the file to a USB drive. Didn't upload it. Didn't back it up. Just handed it to Chad. You remember anything about the file name?" Jamie thought for a second. "I think it was Q2 Revised Final, something like that. I didn't get a good look, but it was definitely labeled as a final report." Keanu jotted that down in his notebook, underlined it twice. "You did the right thing by telling me." "Hope so," Jaime said, "'cause ever since I worked that shift, Chad's been giving me weird looks. Like he knows I saw something I wasn't supposed to." "Did they threaten you?" "Not directly," Jaime said, "but the next week I lost my weekend shifts. That's half my paycheck." Keanu looked at him. "Do your parents know what's going on?" Jaime shook his head. "It's just me and my mom. She's disabled. I work evenings and weekends so we can keep the apartment. I can't afford to lose this job, Mr. Reeves." Keanu was quiet for a beat. Then he said, "You won't." Jaime looked over, unsure if he'd heard right. "You've already done more than some people twice your age would," Keanu said. "You've got good instincts. And guts." Jaime looked down, then smiled faintly. "Thanks. I've been wanting to say something for a long time." "Well, now you're going to help me make sure no one else has to go through what you've seen." "Okay," Jaime said. "I'm in. I'll do whatever it takes." Keanu nodded. "Then I'll protect you. Just keep watching, keep taking mental notes, and if they ask questions, you say, 'Nothing's changed.'" Jaime sat up a little straighter. "Got it." Keanu reached into the glove compartment and pulled out a sealed envelope. He handed it to Jaime without a word. "What's this?" Jamie asked. "Something to take the pressure off," Keanu said. "It's a short-term wage supplement. Quiet, no one else will know. Enough to make sure you and your mom don't fall behind while we clean this up." Jamie hesitated. "I didn't do this for money." "I know," Keanu replied. "That's why you've earned it." After a long pause, Jaime took the envelope and tucked it into his backpack. He didn't say thank you. He just nodded, solemn and full of weight. "Maria said you'd listen," Jaime said finally. "I didn't think you'd believe someone like me." "I believe people who pay attention," Keanu said, "and who act when it counts." The two sat in silence for a moment longer. The wind outside picked up, pushing trash across the pavement like forgotten pieces of someone else's story. But this story was no longer slipping through the cracks. It was being pulled into the light. Keanu checked the time on his phone. "You should get home. I'll reach out in a few days. You'll know when it's time." Jamie nodded again and opened the door, then paused before stepping out. "There's one more thing," he said. "Karen had the woman Maria mentioned. She used to keep a binder in her locker. It had printed reports, shift logs, stuff she kept to prove she wasn't stealing. I think it's still there. Would the locker still be accessible?" "It's not locked anymore. They cleaned out her stuff, but I saw the binder shoved behind some boxes last week." Keanu's eyes lit with renewed focus. "Good. Don't grab it yourself. Just tell me where it is." "Storage room, top right shelf, behind the old seasonal signage." Keanu made a note. "You just gave us more leverage." Jaime's voice grew more certain. They tried to bury her, but she knew what was happening. She just didn't have backup. She does now, Keanu said. Jamie stepped out of the car, slinging his backpack higher on his shoulder. As he disappeared into the shadows of the sidewalk, Keanu sat still, thinking of all the things he'd heard tonight. Every sentence, every stolen receipt, every buried report. It was all falling into place. The bakery wasn't just under attack, it was under siege from within. But now the silence had cracked. One voice had broken through, and it was a young cashier barely out of high school. Sometimes, the loudest truths come from the quietest corners. And now that Jaime had stepped forward, the momentum was shifting. The bakery's walls might still be cold, but something had stirred in the foundation. The fight to save Everglow wasn't just alive. It had found its spark. Keanu Reeves pulled into the underground parking garage of a quiet law office on Glendale Boulevard. The concrete walls echoed with the hum of fluorescent lights. He parked in the far corner where the security cameras wouldn't catch his plate. Not yet. He entered through the back stairwell and made his way to the 4th floor. The nameplate on the frosted glass door read, "Natalie Chang, Attorney at Law." He didn't knock. He didn't need to. Natalie was already standing, arms crossed, a mug of black coffee steaming on the desk beside her. Her long black coat hung behind the door, and her expression was sharper than her cheekbones. "You sounded calm on the phone," she said, "which means you're actually furious." Keanu walked in and set a thick folder on her desk without speaking. Natalie opened it, scanned the first few pages, and then raised her eyebrows. "This is real?" He nodded. "All of it." She pulled out the second set of documents, photocopies of forged signatures, screenshots of altered digital inventory, and the printed transcript of Chad and Kyle's recent conversation about their plans for Crestline Capital. Natalie leaned back slowly, processing. "You've got a solid foundation. But if we're going to build this into a case that locks them out for good, no loopholes, no comebacks, we need a confession, clear intent, preferably recorded." "I figured you'd say that." "Good, because I've already got an idea," she said, tapping the folder. "They're expecting to pitch this mess to Crestline, right? Thinking the bakery's a lost cause that they can quietly scoop up and flip?" Keanu nodded again. "They think I'm asleep at the wheel." "Then let's give them a buyer," Natalie said, "someone too good to ignore." Keanu hesitated just for a moment. Then he smiled slightly. "I know just the guy." Natalie raised an eyebrow. "This someone reliable?" "More than that," Keanu said. "He's unpredictable in all the right ways." By 5:00 p.m., Keanu was sitting in a booth at a dimly lit downtown jazz lounge across from Malcolm Drake, an old friend from the indie film circuit who had since turned his attention to high-end consulting and business negotiation. Malcolm was lean, well-dressed, and always 2 steps ahead of whoever was in the room with him. "So, let me get this straight," Malcolm said, sipping a glass of ginger ale. "You want me to pretend to be an investor interested in buying your own bakery just to bait these guys into confessing their plan to defraud you?" "That's right. You're sure you don't want me to just hire someone to scare them off?" Keanu shook his head. "I want this clean, legal, documented." Malcolm grinned. "That's a first." "This matters," Keanu said. Malcolm leaned back and studied him for a long second. Then he nodded. "All right, I'm in. But I want full access to the script, freedom to improvise, and an audience when it's done." "You'll get all 3. 2 days later, the trap was ready. Natalie had booked a private workspace inside a WeWork building downtown. There, she and Malcolm spent an entire afternoon running through the setup. Natalie handled the legal framework, how far Malcolm could push without crossing a line, what language they were hoping to elicit from Chad and Kyle, and how to maneuver the conversation toward confirmation of a hostile buyout plan. "Stick to their egos," Natalie said. "They think they're smarter than everyone. Let them prove it to you." Malcolm took notes but barely needed them. His gift had always been in reading people. He knew the exact moment someone's greed would override their caution. "Keep them talking," Natalie said. "We're not after vague intent. We want them to say it, 'We planned this, we faked this, we're taking it from Reeves.' And if they laugh while they say it, even better." Keanu stayed mostly silent, watching from the corner of the room. But when Malcolm looked over and asked, "You sure you're okay with them not knowing you're behind the curtain?" Keanu answered without hesitation, "I don't need credit, I just need them exposed." That night, Marcus synced the audio and visual gear one last time. High-definition microphones had been embedded in the wall art of the bakery's office. A ceiling camera was angled just enough to capture the desk without being noticed. Every cable was hidden, every feed streamed live to Natalie's secure server. The following morning, Malcolm arrived at Everglow Bakery dressed in a tailored navy suit and silver cufflinks. His business card read Richard Harmon, Apex Ventures. He carried a black leather folio, a Rolex knockoff, and the air of a man who had too much money to waste on sentiment. Keanu, already seated at a distant table in disguise, gave a subtle nod to Jaime behind the counter. Jaime responded by handing Malcolm a complimentary coffee and whispering, "Chad's in the office. Kyle's on register." Within seconds, Kyle noticed Malcolm and perked up. "Morning," Kyle said, stepping out from behind the counter. "Can I help you with something?" Malcolm flashed a confident smile. "Richard Harmon. I'm here to speak with either Mr. Ortega or Mr. Ransom. I was told this location might be open to acquisition." Kyle's eyes lit up. "You're the investor? From Apex?" "I am. This way." Keanu sipped his coffee slowly, tracking every step. He watched as Malcolm followed Kyle through the hallway, back into the small, poorly lit office with the crooked blinds and stained carpet. The door clicked shut, and the cameras began rolling. On the feed that streamed to Natalie's office, Chad was already sitting with a laptop open, posture too relaxed for someone running a dying business. Kyle introduced Malcolm, and the two men immediately started pitching the problem. "Owner's too attached," Chad said. "We've been trying to modernize, but he keeps slipping back into old habits." "He's nostalgic," Kyle added. "Great guy, terrible businessman." Malcolm leaned back in his chair, one hand resting on the edge of the desk, the other casually holding his coffee. He gave them space to talk, saying little, just enough to keep them going. "So, walk me through it," Malcolm said. "What makes this place worth the risk?" Chad smiled, flipping his laptop around to display a doctored financial sheet. "On paper, it's a disaster. Declining revenue, customer complaints, inflated overhead. But that's by design." Malcolm raised an eyebrow. "By design?" Kyle leaned in, almost proud. "We've been shaping the narrative for months. Raised prices, cut quality, reduced staff. Customers dropped off, just like we knew they would. And the owner? Still thinks it's market trends," Chad said. "TikTok fads, labor shortages, whatever buzzword we feed him that week." Kyle chuckled. "He's not stupid, just loyal to the wrong things. Family legacy, nostalgia. He's blinded by it." Malcolm tapped the desk slowly. "And the plan?" Chad's voice dropped just slightly, but not enough to dampen the arrogance. "Our contact at Crestline Capital is ready. Once this quarter's numbers post, we pitch the solution. We offer to buy out the business, claim we're saving it. We'll run it through a shell company," Kyle added. "He won't even know it's us until the ink's dry." Malcolm tilted his head. "And he'll sell?" Chad leaned back and crossed his arms. "He'll fold. Everything's lined up. Cost spikes, loss of customer base, a couple more quiet failures, and he'll think it's the only way out. Besides," Kyle said, "he's not here anymore. He doesn't see what happens day to day. We're the only voices he hears." Malcolm gave a slow nod, letting the pause linger. "So, you sabotage the place from within, disguise it as decline, and position yourselves as the solution." "You could say that," Chad said. And the owner still trusts you? Chad laughed. That's the best part. He has no idea. Back at Natalie's office, the audio was crystal clear. Every word, every pause, every smug chuckle, recorded and logged. Keanu stood behind her, watching the feed with his arms folded, eyes locked on the screen. His face didn't move, not a twitch. But inside, the quiet storm was forming. Natalie clicked stop on the recorder. That's the confession, she said. Clear motive, method, and premeditated fraud. Marcus leaned forward from the back of the room. They basically wrote the closing argument for us. Keanu didn't move. His voice came low, even. Maybe won't just lose the bakery. They'll lose everything. Natalie nodded. We're almost there. Now we finish it right. Keanu closed his notebook. A Tom-Moore meeting, he said. One more layer of truth. Then we show them exactly what loyalty looks like when it fights back. Outside the office, the city buzzed with life. But inside those feeds, in every word Chad and Kyle had spilled, the countdown had already begun. The trap was set, and justice was coming, with flour on its hands and truth in its teeth. The morning sun spilled gently across the sidewalk outside Everglow Bakery, casting long shadows on the street. Inside, everything looked normal. Jaime prepped the counter. The display case held the usual bland pastries. The dull music looped through the speakers. But there was tension beneath the surface, the kind that comes before a storm. At precisely 9:15 IEM, Malcolm Drake, still in character as Richard Harmon, pushed open the door, holding a leather portfolio and wearing the same navy suit from his previous visit. He moved with casual confidence, scanning the room as if he were appraising real estate, which, in a way, he was. Kyle spotted him first and practically jogged over. Mr. Harmon, Kyle said, outstretching a hand. Good to see you again. Likewise, Malcolm said with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. Is Mr. Ransom in? Right this way, Kyle said, waving him back like they'd known each other for years. From a small, hidden device embedded in the wall behind the community chalkboard, the audio began recording the moment Malcolm entered. Jamie gave a subtle nod to Keanu, who sat in the corner under his hoodie, pretending to type on a laptop. Keanu nodded back once, then focused on the feed coming through his earpiece. The two managers led Malcolm into the cramped office at the back of the bakery. The door clicked shut behind them. You ready to make some money? Chad asked, leaning back in his chair, lacing his fingers behind his head. That depends, Malcolm replied, casually flipping open his folder. Show me the real numbers. Kyle grinned and pulled up a spreadsheet on the office desktop. This is the internal version, not the one we show the IRS, he said with a wink. Keanu listened, unmoving, his eyes locked on his screen. So, as you can see, Chad began, we've increased prices across the board by 20 to 50% over the last 8 months, subbed out premium ingredients for lower-cost vendors. Our overhead is artificially high, but margins are wider than ever. That's where your profit lives. Malcolm nodded slowly. And the customer base? Mostly gone, Kyle replied. By design. Older folks couldn't handle the price hikes. We phased out all the specials and discounts that brought in the loyalty crowd. And the staff? We thinned the herd, Chad said. Anyone too attached to the old ways was given a nudge out the door. Malcolm raised an eyebrow. And the owner? Kyle laughed. Steele thinks he's preserving tradition. Guy's a walking quote board. Says things like, keep the soul in the dough. Real sentimental type. Chad added. He's more mascot than manager. Spends most of his time on set or hiding out somewhere in Topanga Canyon. We feed him spreadsheets, buzzwords, and the occasional customer complaint to keep him distracted. Malcolm jotted a fake note. What's your timeline? Soon, Chad said. Crestline Capital will be ready in a few weeks. They'll buy the business at a loss, we'll buy it from them on the back end, then flip the brand in 6 months. And the owner never suspects? Kyle smirked. He still wears the same flannel shirt from 10 years ago. He's a ghost in his own bakery. Back in the front of the bakery, Keanu's jaw tightened. The words stung more than he expected. He'd spent his life avoiding the spotlight when it came to things that truly mattered to him. This bakery, his aunt's legacy, wasn't some vanity project. It was a piece of his soul. And to hear them call him a joke in flannel, like he didn't matter, like the love behind the place was something to mock, it cut deep. He didn't flinch, didn't react. He simply closed his laptop. The audio was still being recorded, the camera still rolling, but he didn't need to hear another word. The evidence was sealed, the confession complete, but that wasn't enough. Keanu wanted the truth to be seen, not just in a courtroom, not just by lawyers or investors. He wanted the people who came here, who trusted the Everglow name, to know what had happened, what had been done behind the counters, what had been stolen. Not money, trust. That night, Keanu met with Natalie and Malcolm in a small apartment above a hardware store in Echo Park. The walls were bare, the tables scratched, but the energy in the room was electric. "We've got everything we need," Natalie said, sliding her laptop toward him. "Multiple confessions, clear intent, malicious sabotage. We can go straight to court." "Not yet," Keanu said. Natalie looked up. "Why not?" "Because the community deserves to see it too. They loved this place. They supported it. They deserve the truth before the headlines spin it into something hollow." Malcolm nodded, understanding. "So what are you thinking?" "A town hall," Keanu said, "but not at City Hall. Right here, at the bakery. I want the lights on. I want the ovens going. I want Maria at the front counter, Jaime by her side. And I want the people who walked away to walk back in. And when they do," Natalie asked, "we show them who really tried to destroy this place. Not in anger, in truth." Natalie tapped her fingers on the table. "That'll take planning." "Not too much," Keanu said. "The story already told itself." Malcolm grinned. "You're gonna make this theatrical, aren't you?" Keanu shrugged. "If that's what it takes." Natalie leaned forward. "I'll prep the legal notices and cease and desists, but if you want to do this publicly, we'll need releases, waivers, and someone watching the door in case Chad or Kyle catch on." "I'll handle the logistics," Keanu said. "I just need you to make sure that once the truth is out, they can't bury it." Malcolm lifted his glass of water like a toast. "To justice. And pastries." Keanu managed the faintest smile, but behind that calm, his mind was moving fast. The time for silence had passed. He wasn't going to hide behind ownership papers or private lawyers. He was going to face the truth, in front of everyone. And for the first time since he walked into Everglow and tasted that cold, artificial donut, the fire was back. The bakery had been wounded, but it wasn't broken. Not yet. The morning air was brisk, with a faint haze rolling over the streets of Silver Lake as Keanu stepped out of his car. The bakery sat quietly under the dull sky, its windows glowing softly. Today, it looked almost peaceful, but beneath that surface, something irreversible was about to unfold. He wore the same hoodie and cap as before, slipping in through the side door like any other anonymous customer. No one gave him a second glance. Jaime gave a quick, practiced nod from behind the register. Maria, already in the kitchen, barely looked up as she worked dough with a kind of reverence that made it seem like prayer. At 10:00 a.m. sharp, Malcolm returned. But this time he wasn't alone. Natalie Chang walked beside him, dressed with the sleek precision of someone who never lost control of a room. She carried a slim silver briefcase and wore her usual expression, calm, unreadable, with just enough intensity to make anyone nervous. Chad met them at the door, eager. "You must be Miss Lorne," he said, addressing Natalie. She extended her hand. "Pleasure. This is my business partner," Malcolm added. "She handles compliance." Kyle emerged from the back, wiping his hands on a towel. "Glad you both could make it. We've been looking forward to this." As they led them into the office, Keanu sat at a corner booth and opened his laptop. The live feed began streaming directly into his screen. Jaime double-checked the audio connection. Everything was rolling. Inside the office, the mood shifted quickly. Kyle pulled up their newest internal figures on the screen. "These are projections based on what we've already implemented," he said, voice confident. "The bakery appears to be failing, but in 6 months, if we rebrand, automate half the kitchen, and switch entirely to cost-sufficient frozen stock, we're looking at 300% margin increases." Malcolm nodded, pretending to be impressed. Natalie didn't blink. "And how did you arrive at those numbers?" Chad leaned forward. "By reworking the supply lines. We've been filtering premium orders through our private vendors. The brand name stays, but the quality drops. Nobody notices." Natalie tilted her head. "That sounds risky, especially if the original owner catches on." Kyle laughed. "He won't. Keanu Reeves may own this place, but he hasn't been hands-on in years. He wanted to preserve some family dream. But business isn't about nostalgia. It's about leverage. And we've got it." "Have you altered any financial reports?" Natalie asked smoothly. Ed responded without hesitation. "Adjusted, not altered. We reflect the trends we want investors to see. You have to play the game to win it." "And inventory?" "Streamlined," Kyle said. "Fake vendor trails. It looks like we're using imported Belgian chocolate and organic flour. We're not. It's all from discount distributors. As long as the packaging matches, no one digs deeper." Malcolm glanced at Natalie, as if giving her silent permission to press further. "Would you be willing to provide us those vendor lists?" she asked. Kyle smirked. "Of course. We'll even show you the fake paperwork. It's airtight." Keanu listened in silence, every word tightening something in his chest. They weren't just arrogant. They were gleeful, as if dismantling his aunt's dream had become a game, a trophy. Natalie tapped her pen against her notebook. "So, just to clarify," she said, voice calm and deliberate, "you're representing that all this has been done with the owner's approval?" Chad waved it off. "We had blanket authority. He signed a general delegation clause years ago. He trusts us." Kyle added, "He even thanked us once for keeping the place afloat. He has no idea how deep we've cut." Malcolm leaned back in his chair, letting the silence stretch for a few seconds. "Any original name then? Why not just rebrand from scratch?" Chad smirked. "Because Everglow still means something. It still pulls in the sentimentals. Once we relaunch, we'll spin it as under new management. Give it a trendy facelift. People won't care that it's not homemade anymore. They'll care it's back." "And the staff?" Natalie asked. Kyle rolled his eyes. "Maria, Jaime, they're placeholders. We'll phase them out after the transition. Quietly, politely, no fuss." Natalie nodded and closed her notebook. Malcolm stood. "I think we've heard enough for now. We'll be in touch." As they left the room, the audio continued to roll for a few more seconds, capturing Kyle muttering, "If this deal goes through, we're golden." Outside, the sun had moved higher, casting sharp angles of light through the bakery's front windows. Keanu didn't lift his head. He stared at the timestamp on his screen, then pulled out his phone and sent a single text to Natalie. "Done." The message was silent, but it hit like a gavel. Natalie and Malcolm rounded the corner and walked past Keanu's table without acknowledging him. But as they passed, Natalie gave the faintest tilt of her head. Confirmation received. Operation complete. Upstairs, in the modest space above the bakery that Keanu had quietly refurbished into a makeshift office, the final backups of the recordings were being saved to 3 separate drives, one for legal action, one for public release, one for safekeeping. Jaime sat on the floor next to a small TV, watching the replay, his hands balled into fists. "They really said all that?" he muttered. "They play," Keanu said. Maria stood near the window, her apron still on. "What happens now?" Keanu didn't answer immediately. He looked at the table in front of him. where an old photograph sat between stacks of files. It was a photo of his aunt, standing in front of Everglow Bakery on its opening day. Her smile was bright. Her hands were dusted with flour. The sign above her still gleamed with fresh paint. "I gave them trust," Keanu said. "They used it as a weapon. But now we have the truth," Jamie said. "Yes," Keanu said. "Now it's time to let the community hear it." He stood and closed the laptop. Everything was in place. The betrayal had been recorded, the confession captured. But justice wasn't just about punishment. It was about restoration. And tomorrow, the restoration would begin. The next morning arrived quietly, but not without weight. Everglow Bakery opened at its usual hour, lights warming the display case, coffee brewing with that familiar bitterness that no longer carried comfort. The bell above the door jingled like any other day, but today was different. Keanu Reeves didn't wear a disguise. He walked through the front entrance slowly, his boots tapping softly against the tiled floor. No hoodie, no cap, just a gray flannel shirt, clean jeans, and a stare that held the weight of something final. Jamie looked up from behind the counter, almost startled, but said nothing. He just gave a single nod and stepped back. Maria saw him from the kitchen, her hand frozen mid-reach for a tray. The silence rolled forward like a wave, touching every corner of the building. Even the usual clinking from the dishwasher in the back faded, as if the building itself held its breath. Chad Ransom was in the office with Kyle Ortega, going over fake investor profiles. The door was closed, the blinds were half drawn. Keanu didn't knock. He pushed the door open and stepped inside. Chad looked up and stopped mid-sentence. Kyle turned halfway in his chair. Both froze. For a long second, no one said a word. Then Keanu spoke, quietly. "You were saying something about the owner." His voice wasn't angry. It wasn't loud. But it filled the room with something heavier than shouting ever could. The tone was pure steel. Chad stood slowly, his face draining of color. "Mr. Reeves? Kyle didn't even try to speak. His jaw hung slightly open, eyes darting between Keanu and the half-grown laptop in front of them, where yesterday's numbers were still visible. Natalie and Malcolm stepped into the room behind Keanu. They didn't say a word either, just stood, arms crossed, watching. The silence they brought with them was sharp and surgical. Keanu didn't move. His eyes remained locked on Chad. "You were planning something," Keanu said softly. "Wasn't that the word? A transition? A rebrand?" Neither manager replied. Natalie opened her briefcase and laid 2 manila folders gently on the desk. Each was thick with printouts, audio transcripts, screenshots. Legal weight. Truth. "I listened to every word," Keanu said. "The coffee, the fake chocolate, the customers you pushed away, the staff you lied to." Kyle finally spoke, a nervous tremor in his voice. "We thought you were never here and it wasn't personal." "But it was," Keanu interrupted. His voice was firmer now. "It always was. This bakery was built with hands that knew how to knead trust into flour. It healed people. It fed more than mouths. And you treated it like a playground." Chad took a step back. "Look, we can explain." "You already did," Malcolm said. "On camera, multiple times." Natalie pointed to the folder. "Forgery? Misrepresentation? Breach of fiduciary duty? You want us to keep listing?" Keanu didn't react to their panic. He didn't raise his voice. He simply turned to leave. But at the door, he paused and looked back. "You were right about one thing," he said. "I didn't know how deep the damage went, but now I do." He nodded toward Natalie. "And so will everyone else." Then he walked out. The walk from the office back into the main bakery felt different now. Not like a return, but like a reclaiming. Keanu didn't say anything as he passed through the narrow hallway. He didn't need to. The staff who had watched the place crumble from the inside could feel the shift in the air. It was quiet, but it pulsed with finality. Maria stepped out from the kitchen, wiping her hands on her apron. Her eyes met Keanu's, and for a moment, the years between them seemed to disappear. He gave her a gentle nod, and she blinked hard, returning the gesture. No words, just understanding. Behind him, Natalie and Malcolm exited the office. Natalie handed the 2 folders to a waiting courier at the front door, already prepared to deliver them to the necessary authorities. One would go to the city's Department of Labor, the other to Keanu's own legal team. Chad and Kyle didn't follow. They remained inside, likely scrambling, already aware that their game was over. There would be no counterplay, no last-minute exit strategy, just consequences. Jaime watched them from behind the register, then turned to Keanu. "They know it's over, don't they?" Keanu nodded. "They do now." For the rest of the day, the bakery continued business as usual, but everything had changed. Customers began to return, slowly at first, then steadily. Regulars who had once stopped coming through the doors began trickling back in, drawn by something intangible, an energy they'd forgotten. Jaime greeted each of them with a quiet pride, and Maria went back to using the original recipes, pulling out the handwritten index card stored in a drawer beneath the prep table. Keanu didn't make a scene. He didn't post online. He didn't go to the press. But word still spread. Employees who had once been silenced began to whisper to others. The baker had returned. The real one. And he wasn't letting the soul of Everglow get buried under spreadsheets and sabotage. At one point, a young girl approached the counter with her grandfather, holding his hand tightly. "Is this the place with the story?" she asked softly. Jaime smiled. "Yes, it is." The grandfather looked around. "Feels like it used to." That evening, after the final customer left, Keanu stayed behind while the lights dimmed and the ovens cooled. He sat in the same booth he had used while disguised, the same one where he first realized something was deeply wrong. But this time, he wasn't hiding. He was watching. Maria came over with a tray, just one item. A chocolate-glazed donut, carefully made from scratch. "No shortcuts," she said. He took a bite. It was warm, soft, and full of something he hadn't tasted in years. Truth. Jaime sat down across from him, exhausted but proud. "We did it," he said. Keanu didn't respond right away. He was staring at the tray, then the counter, then the photo hanging above the register, the same one he'd seen as a child, of his aunt, dusted in flour, smiling with a spark that couldn't be faked. "No," Keanu said finally, "we're just getting started." Outside, the streets of Silver Lake were quiet again. But inside Everglow Bakery, something had been restored. Not just ownership, legacy. And it had a heartbeat again. The sun had only just begun to rise when Keanu unlocked the front door of Everglow Bakery. Unlike every other morning, the ovens remained off, and the smell of fresh dough didn't fill the space. The display case stood empty. The chalkboard menu had been wiped clean. Chairs were pulled from tables and arranged in 3 careful rows, facing a mounted projector screen on the far wall. A quiet hush hung in the air, not of silence, but of something about to begin. Keanu moved between the chairs with purpose. Each had a folded card with a name handwritten in black ink. Mrs. Helen Carter, Jaime LeBlanc, Maria Alvarez, Gordon Lim. Carol and Terry, the couple who always split a cinnamon roll on Fridays, names that had filled this bakery long before deception crept in. By 7:15, I end them. The door was gently opened for guests only. No customers, no outsiders, only those who had once been part of Everglow's heart. Keanu stood by the entrance, greeting each person as they walked in. Some were confused, others nervous. Many hadn't seen him in person in years, and even fewer had ever been invited to something like this. Helen Carter arrived holding a small purse, her hand trembling slightly. Keanu offered his arm to steady her and guided her gently to the second row. Maria walked in next. Her eyes went straight to the screen, then to the front row, where she sat down slowly. She clutched a napkin in her hand like a shield. Jamie entered quietly and took a spot in the back. He looked around at all the familiar faces, all the people who had once defined the rhythm of the bakery's daily life. Some smiled faintly. Others looked down, uncertain. At 7:59, Chad Ransom and Kyle Ortega walked through the door. They froze when they saw the chairs, the screen, the names. "What is this?" Chad whispered. Kyle's brow furrowed. "I thought we were meeting with legal." Neither noticed Keanu step behind them. He gently closed the door. At 8:00 IEM sharp, the lights dimmed. There was no introduction, no speech, just the screen flickering to life and the first clip playing. Chad's voice echoed through the speakers, loud, confident, "We're just filtering premium orders through our private vendors. The brand name stays, but the quality drops. Nobody notices." A gasp broke the silence. Then came Kyle's voice. "Keanu Reeves may own this place, but he hasn't been hands-on in years. Business isn't about nostalgia, it's about leverage." Another murmur ran through the room. The footage kept playing, clip after clip, bragging, boasting, strategies laid out like roadmaps to ruin. Mrs. Carter raised a hand to her mouth. Tears welled behind her glasses. Maria's hands began to tremble, her napkin clenched into a knot. In the back, Jaime sat frozen, eyes locked on the screen. Then the final moment came. Kyle laughed. "They're placeholders. We'll phase them out after the transition. Quietly, politely, no fuss." The screen faded to black. The lights returned. And standing at the front of the room was Keanu, wearing a faded blue apron dusted faintly with flour, the same apron his aunt had worn on opening day, stitched with her initials in the corner. No one moved. Keanu stood silently, allowing the weight of what they had seen to settle. His eyes scanned the room, not for judgment, but for understanding. Chad and Kyle didn't speak. They stood near the wall, pale, motionless, exposed. The entire room had seen them, heard them, for who they truly were. Keanu finally spoke. "This place," he began quietly, "was never about profit. It was never about growth. My aunt built Everglow to be a space where people felt remembered, cared for, known." He looked down at the apron, then back up. "She taught me how to roll dough when I was 10 years old. Right over there," he gestured toward the prep counter. It wasn't about making the perfect loaf. It was about sharing warmth. His voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. "I bought this bakery years ago not because I needed a business. I bought it because I couldn't let her legacy be turned into noise. I trusted people to help protect that." He turned to Chad and Kyle. "And that trust was broken?" Chad opened his mouth as if to speak, but Keanu raised a hand. "No more words, we've heard enough of those." He looked back to the community gathered before him. "I asked you all here because you deserved the truth. You were lied to, manipulated, and pushed aside. That ends today." Helen Carter stood slowly. Her voice cracked. "You knew what this place meant. You still do." Keanu nodded. "I never stopped caring. I just stopped showing up. That was my mistake. I thought legacy could protect itself, but legacy needs guardians." Maria stepped forward, eyes glistening. "What happens now?" Keanu walked toward her and gently placed a hand on her shoulder. "Now," he said, "we rebuild together." A wave of quiet relief passed through the room. It didn't look like a cheer. It didn't sound like applause. But it was something deeper. An exhale held in for far too long. Chad took a step toward the exit, but Natalie, who had been waiting by the door, held out an envelope. "Legal proceedings begin tomorrow. You'll hear from us." Kyle followed, his face drained of the smugness it once carried. As they walked out, no one looked at them. They were no longer part of the room. Once the door shut, Keanu looked back to the people still seated. "I'm not just reopening Everglow," he said. I'm reopening its heart. He looked to Jemay. That means putting the right people at the counter. He looked to Maria, putting the right recipes back in the oven. And finally to Helen, and putting our truth in the books again. There was a long pause before Helen whispered, then, we'll be here, every day. Keanu smiled. So will I. He walked to the window and flipped the sign from closed to restoring. Not open, not yet, but soon. And this time, it wouldn't just be a bakery. It would be a revival, a promise, a quiet stand against betrayal, and a loud return to everything that mattered. It was time. Keanu stood near the front counter of Everglow Bakery, still wearing the blue apron his aunt once wore. The chairs from the morning gathering had been pushed aside, but the weight of what had just happened still clung to the room, like flour in the air. Chad and Kyle lingered by the side wall, as if unsure whether they should still be there. Neither had dared speak since the video played. Their faces remained drawn and pale, eyes avoiding everyone else in the bakery. Natalie stepped forward. In accordance with the internal investigation, we're terminating your employment, effective immediately, she said. Your actions violated the terms of your contract, California labor law, and fiduciary responsibility to the owner and staff. She handed each of them a sealed envelope, termination documents signed and dated. Chad reached for his but didn't open it. Kyle simply took his and stared at the floor. Keanu took a step forward. You manipulated people I trusted. You misused my name. You drove customers away, not with incompetence, but with intention. I can't let that go unanswered. Neither man responded. Two uniformed security officers entered from the side hallway. They had been briefed earlier and stood silently, waiting for Keanu's nod. He gave it. Chad turned to leave, shoulders slumped. Kyle hesitated, as if considering one last word, then thought better of it. Both walked through the front door, under the eyes of everyone in the room. The silence that followed was not cold. It was solemn, measured. Maria let out a breath she didn't know she was holding. Jaime looked at the others, then slowly stepped forward and stood beside Keanu. Mrs. Carter dabbed her eyes with a handkerchief, her posture finally relaxing. Keanu turned back to the group. I should have seen this sooner, he said quietly. I thought I was protecting this place by staying in the background, by letting others run it. But silence isn't stewardship, and absence doesn't guard legacy. He looked at every person in the room, one by one. This isn't just about what they did, he continued. It's about what I didn't do. And for that, I owe you more than just words. He paused, letting the air shift. I'm sorry. A simple phrase, but heavy. From him, it mattered. I let this place drift. I let people you trusted fall silent, and I let my aunt's memory be manipulated. But that ends here. A few heads nodded. Someone in the back murmured, that's all we needed. Keanu took a deep breath. This bakery has always been more than flour and sugar. It's where neighbors found each other again, where kindness was kneaded into every loaf. I want that back. But I can't do it alone. He looked toward Maria, then Helen, then Jaime. I'm asking you to help me fix this. Maria stepped forward. Start with the dough, whose laughter rippled gently through the crowd. Helen smiled through tears. And the books. Keanu nodded. And the spirit. The front door remained closed to the public, but the people in that room no longer felt like staff or old customers. They felt like something bigger, like caretakers of something sacred. Natalie took a moment to address the group. Legal proceedings are underway. Fraud charges have been filed with supporting video and paper evidence. The Labor Board will be notified of the false terminations, stolen tips, and manipulated pay scales. This process won't be overnight, but accountability has started. There was a quiet nod of understanding across the room. Keanu stepped forward again. But justice alone isn't the goal, he said. Closure is. He paused to let those words settle. We've seen the truth. We've said goodbye to the ones who betrayed that truth. Now it's time to decide what this place becomes next. He turned to the chalkboard behind the counter. It had been wiped clean earlier, but now Keanu picked up a piece of chalk and wrote a single word. Renewal. He underlined it once. I want Everglow to reflect who we are now. Honest, resilient, real. So today, I'm inviting each of you to be part of that process. He looked at Helen. You know the original supplier lists. I want your help restoring them. He turned to Maria. Every recipe you remember, every method you still believe in, we bring it back. Then to Jaime. You're not just a cashier anymore. You're part of the next chapter, if you're willing. Jaime blinked, stunned. I am. Others began stepping forward. Gordon, the retired electrician, raised a hand. I helped wire the ovens 15 years ago. I can check the equipment. Carol and Terry smiled. We used to host community nights here. Live music, open mic. We could bring those back. A spark lit in the room that hadn't been there in years. It wasn't just about restoring a business. It was about resurrecting a spirit. Maria wiped her hands on her apron and moved toward the kitchen. I'll start a batch, she said, half laughing, half choked with emotion. Keanu grinned. Helen made her way to the office, motioning for Jaime to help her access the old files. Let's pull the books from 5 years ago, she said. Back when the numbers still told the truth. Within minutes, the room had shifted from solemn stillness to movement. Chairs scraped against the floor. Doors opened. Lights flipped on in the kitchen. Natalie stood beside Keanu, arms crossed, smiling faintly. You're not rebuilding a bakery, she said. You're healing a wound. He looked around the room and saw the familiar flour-dusted counters, the handwritten signage, the old tin measuring cups hanging by the prep sink. No, Keanu said. They are. He stepped back, letting the others lead. Outside, people began to pass by, curious about the gathering inside. A few peeked through the window. One tapped gently on the door. Keanu walked over and cracked it open. We're not open yet, he said with a soft smile, but we're getting there. The man nodded, recognizing him, but said nothing. He gave a thumbs up and walked on. Back inside, Maria shouted from the kitchen. Ovens are hot. Helen called out from the office. Receipts checked and matched. And Jaime appeared from behind the counter with a broom, sweeping away flour, debris, and remnants of a betrayal that no longer had a place there. Keanu stood in the middle of it all, still wearing the apron that smelled faintly of cinnamon and thyme. The reckoning was over. Now came the restoration. 3 weeks later, the scent of warm cinnamon rolls and buttered scones drifted down the sidewalks of Silver Lake again. Passers-by paused near the doorway of Everglow Bakery, some taking a second breath just to make sure it wasn't their imagination. But it was real. The bakery was open, and the spirit was unmistakably back. The display case gleamed with golden loaves, real chocolate croissants, and buttery biscuits stacked with care. No shortcuts. No frozen dough. Maria Alvarez had restored every recipe to its original form, down to the ratios handwritten in the margins of the old kitchen journal. Keanu watched from the side one morning, sipping black coffee with the apron folded beside him. He didn't run the floor. He didn't bark orders. He simply watched, letting the space speak for itself. Maria, now wearing a deep blue apron of her own, moved between the ovens and prep counter like a conductor guiding an orchestra. She had stepped into the role of general manager with grace and quiet power. Every tray she lifted out of the oven carried not just baked goods, but pride. Jaime, now assistant manager, wore a badge that made customers smile. Started at the register, still smiling. He swept floors, restocked shelves, and handled the early shift inventory checks. One morning, he arrived to find a sealed envelope with his name on it. Inside was a letter from Keanu and a scholarship fund certificate for community college. Jaime had cried. Not out loud. Just enough for Maria to hand him a tissue and keep baking. Word had spread about what had happened. Quietly but surely, the community had rallied not through press releases but through presence. People lined up before dawn again, like they used to in the early years. Some brought flowers. Others brought memories. The chalkboard wall had become a living timeline. Keanu had installed it with the help of a carpenter friend. A long stretch of clean black slate lined the side wall, with 2 small baskets of chalk below. At the top, the words were written in soft script. Share a memory, leave a wish, stay a while. Each day, new notes appeared. I met my wife here in 2004. She still makes better muffins. My mom used to bring me here after swim class. The hot chocolate helped more than she ever knew. Please keep the lemon bars forever. One morning, Jaime noticed a note written low to the ground, in a child's handwriting. Thank you for smelling like love again. The team left that one untouched for a week. Thursday nights turned into poetry nights. A microphone was set up near the front. Locals read short pieces about life, loss, and hope. Maria always served a special pie on those evenings, and Keanu often stayed late, blending into the back corner, listening with his head slightly bowed. Helen Carter returned 3 days a week, sorting receipts and double-checking accounts with a sharpness that rivaled any software. No corners were cut. No names were forgotten. Everglow was no longer a brand. It was a heartbeat. And each day that passed without deception, each customer who left with a warm bag and full heart stitched another piece of that heartbeat back into place. One afternoon, an elderly man named Frank stepped in holding a faded photograph. He looked around slowly, letting the scents carry him. Then he approached Keanu, who happened to be near the counter that day, speaking with Helen. You don't remember me, Frank said, voice rough with time. But I used to deliver flour to your aunt. Keanu turned, smiled softly. Frank, right? Frank blinked. Keanu motioned to the staff. This is Frank. He kept this place running when trucks wouldn't deliver here after the '98 quake. Maria stepped out from the back and gave Frank a hot cinnamon roll free of charge. He sat by the chalkboard wall, staring at the photo he brought. Later that day, he wrote, Still feels like home. The small things returned first. Kids dragging parents in for sugar cookies. Old jazz records playing softly by the window. The clink of real mugs and the hiss of warm milk on the steamer. Even the sunlight seemed different now. Warmer somehow as it hit the flour-dusted counter and spilled across the wooden floorboards. Maria began experimenting with heritage recipes, ones passed down from her grandmother in Oaxaca. She introduced a cinnamon honey bread that sold out within hours. When asked about it, she only said, This one is for healing. Jaime started organizing weekend events for kids. Decorate your own Doughnut Saturdays, storytelling corners, community cleanups. Keanu funded the supplies, but left Jaime to run the show. The joy in the boy's face as he handed out tiny aprons to children made it clear he'd found his calling. Behind the scenes, Natalie helped establish new employee protections, clear financial oversight, and rotating quarterly feedback sessions. Nothing about the new Everglow was casual. It was built for endurance, for care, and for honesty. And Keanu? He came in almost every morning. Sometimes he helped carry crates. Sometimes he just swept. And sometimes, when no one expected it, he stood behind the counter and handed out pastries with a quiet, "Thank you," that always made customers pause. One Sunday morning, a tourist entered, unaware of the story. He bit into a cherry tart and said aloud, This is ridiculous. Like, how is this so good?" Helen smiled from her corner and answered, "Because it's not made for the bottom line." It wasn't just a bakery anymore. It was a place people came to remember who they were and who they wanted to be again. A teacher left a note on the chalkboard that read, "Your bakery helped me believe in people again." One afternoon, Keanu stood near that wall, reading the words one by one. He took a piece of white chalk and added his own. "Thank you for not giving up on what matters." He stepped back and looked at it, letting it sit there, among the stories, wishes, and confessions of a neighborhood rediscovering its roots. Then he turned toward the kitchen, apron already tied, sleeves rolled, ready to knead dough by hand. Just like his aunt once showed him. The dough wasn't just rising in the oven. The spirit was rising too. Everglow was reborn, and it tasted like truth. 3 months later, Everglow was not just open, it was alive. The morning sun warmed the sidewalk, casting golden light across the front windows, which now shimmered with handwritten chalk art and paper hearts left by customers. Inside, the line already curled toward the door, and the buzz of cheerful chatter mingled with the scent of baked cinnamon, fresh yeast, and vanilla. Keanu stood behind the counter wearing a soft, flour-dusted apron and jeans that had seen their share of kitchen stains. He wasn't hiding anymore. He wasn't watching from the sidelines. He was part of the rhythm now, moving trays, filling cups, sharing quiet nods with regulars. At 8:45, he stepped away from the register just long enough to grab a small plate. On it sat a single blueberry scone. He walked across the bakery, weaving past tables and chairs until he reached the corner booth where Mrs. Helen Carter always sat. She was there, of course, as punctual as the sunrise. "Morning, Helen," Keanu said. She looked up from her folder, glasses sliding down her nose, and smiled. "For me?" "Still warm," he said, placing it gently in front of her. Helen didn't say much, just pressed her hand over his for a moment, her eyes brimming. He gave a small nod and stepped back toward the kitchen. In the back, Maria was a whirlwind of motion, commanding the space with quiet confidence. Her voice floated through the kitchen, calling out times, temperatures, and gentle encouragements. The crew listened not because they were told to, but because they believed in her. She had become the heart of the bakery, and it showed in every loaf that came out of the oven. Each batch was checked for crispness, texture, and scent. She refused to let anything less than excellent leave her kitchen. Between rounds of prep, she paused long enough to wave at Keanu through the window. He returned the wave with a grin and kept moving. There was still inventory to restock, a coffee grinder to recalibrate, and a batch of oat muffins needing inspection. And Jaime? He was balancing more than anyone realized. In the mornings, he was there with sleeves rolled up, reviewing shift reports and greeting staff. In the afternoons, he disappeared into his classes, pursuing a degree in small business management thanks to the scholarship Keanu had gifted. By evening, he was often back again, helping close shop or hosting youth poetry nights on Friday. One evening, a local reporter showed up for coffee and stayed for 2 hours. The next day, an article ran in the Silver Lake Weekly under the headline, "Revival of Everglow, the bakery that refused to be bought." The piece featured photos of Keanu handing out pastries, Maria kneading dough, and Jaime helping a young girl decorate a sugar cookie. It spoke of legacy, of trust regained, of what happens when a community chooses to fight for something good. The article was framed and hung beside the chalkboard wall. But even with the attention, the soul of the bakery never changed. Keanu still brewed coffee by hand. Maria still wore the same apron from her first day. Jaime still smiled every time someone called him boss. And customers still left notes that made strangers cry. One morning, a woman in her 30s walked in with her young son. She paused just inside the door, looking around with eyes full of wonder. Then she spotted Keanu behind the counter and walked straight to him. "I don't think you remember me," she said softly. Keanu looked up and studied her face for a moment. "I came here with my mom when I was a kid. She was battling cancer back then. This place, it gave her joy, even on the hard days." She reached into her purse and pulled out an old photo. A woman with a scarf on her head held a cupcake, smiling. Keanu remembered her. He didn't know her name, but he remembered the light in her eyes. "Time passed," the woman said. "But before she did, she told me, if you ever feel lost, go to Everglow." I finally did. Keanu didn't respond with words. He just stepped out from behind the counter and gave her a quiet hug. Moments like that happened more often now. Stories were shared over loaves and espresso. People returned not because of the trend or the name on the door, but because something real was waiting for them inside. Something warm, something true. Later that week, Keanu sat on a bench outside during closing hour, watching the street as it softened under the amber of dusk. Maria joined him, holding 2 cups of tea. "I heard Jaime got an A on his finance midterm," she said, handing him a cup. Keanu smiled. "I'm not surprised. He's got a sharp mind and a bigger heart." Maria nodded. "You saved this place, you know." Keanu shook his head gently. "We did. All of us. You, Helen, Jaime, even the people who kept coming back." Maria looked at him, eyes warm. "No, you chose not to let it die quietly. You gave it a second chance." Keanu took a sip, his gaze lingering on the lights inside the bakery. I just wanted it to feel like home again. And now it does," she said. A family passed by on the sidewalk. The little girl tugged on her mother's sleeve and pointed toward the window display filled with cupcakes shaped like sunflowers. "Can we go in tomorrow?" she asked. Her mom smiled. "Of course, that's our Saturday place now." Keanu watched them disappear around the corner. Inside, Jaime was stacking chairs. Helen was counting receipts at the back table. The last tray of cinnamon buns cooled behind the glass, soft steam rising. Keanu felt something deep in his chest settle. Not satisfaction, not pride, but real peace. This bakery, once nearly hollowed out by greed, was full again. Not just of goods and staff, but of soul. It had become what his aunt had always intended it to be. A place where people didn't just buy food. They came to remember what mattered. He took one more sip of tea and smiled to himself. Redemption, he realized, tastes a lot like home. And for the first time in a long while, he wasn't just passing through. He belonged. The chalkboard menu outside Everglow had always carried something hand-drawn, something warm. But this morning, the words written in bold white letters caught everyone's attention. Introducing the community batch, Donuts with a Story. Customers paused to read the names beneath it. Each one was personal, poetic, familiar. Mrs. Carter's Crumble, a buttery apple cinnamon donut with streusel topping, inspired by the woman who had balanced the bakery's books for over a decade and kept it alive through dark times. Silver Lake Sunrise, a tangy orange glaze with a touch of rosemary, a tribute to the first morning Everglow reopened after the storm. Memory Glaze, a vanilla bourbon swirl filled with raspberry preserves, created in honor of those who had passed but left their mark on Everglow's walls, hearts, and tables. The line outside doubled before 9 a.m. Inside, Maria stood proudly at the display case as each new batch arrived from the kitchen, arranged like delicate artwork. Jaime handed out samples to children, laughing as powdered sugar dusted the tip of his nose. Keanu, sleeves rolled, worked beside them, moving boxes, answering questions, and even scribbling behind the counter on a napkin when a customer suggested a new flavor based on her grandmother's lemon poppy seed cake. And there was joy in the air again. Not the shallow kind, the deep kind, the kind that buzzes in your chest when you know you've touched something that matters. Every donut in the community batch came with a little card telling the story behind it. Guests sat reading them aloud at tables, smiling, sometimes even tearing up. A teenager who had never known Everglow before the revival bit into the memory glaze and said, "This tastes like something important." An older man read the story of Mrs. Carter's Crumble and walked over to thank her directly. She stood behind the register that day, and when he reached her, he said, "You remind me of my wife. She was a numbers woman too." Helen took his hand and smiled. "Then we'd have gotten along just fine." Across the street, behind the tinted windows of a small storefront with a new but already fading sign, 2 men sat and watched. Chad Ransom and Kyle Ortega. Their new bakery, Glaze Theory, had opened 2 weeks prior, with slick branding and investor buzz. But things didn't go as planned. The investors pulled out after the footage from Everglow's confession session leaked online. The employees they'd tried to poach never left Everglow. The product? Mass-produced, rushed, soulless. And the customers? They never came. This morning their display case was full, but untouched. They watched Everglow's sidewalk fill with laughter and children and elderly folks sitting beneath the striped awning, sipping hot coffee and sharing stories. They watched people hug. They watched a mother and daughter take selfies in front of the chalkboard wall. Kyle leaned back in his chair, expression blank. "We could had that," he muttered. Chad didn't answer. He only watched Keanu through the window, standing in the sunlight, his apron streaked with flour. Then, from their vantage point, they saw Keanu glance across the street. He didn't smirk. He didn't gloat. He just looked at them, nodded once, and turned back inside. Later that afternoon, the bakery was packed, every table filled. A group of high schoolers sat at the window drawing their favorite Everglow pastries on sketch pads. A retired teacher told stories to a child who had never tasted real buttercream before. The community wasn't just coming back, they were rooting themselves in this place again. In the back kitchen, Maria placed the finishing touches on a new flavor, a honey lavender donut she'd been working on in secret. She wrote its name on a small card in delicate script. Lucia's Light. She handed the first one to Keanu, her eyes bright. He took a bite, closed his eyes, and nodded. It reminded him of his aunt's garden, of summers when he ran barefoot through the bakery's back lot while she cooled pies on the sill, of nights she held his face and told him to build something real, not something flashy. Keanu swallowed the last bite, smiled, and said, "Put it on the wall." The chalkboard had become more than decoration. It was now a living tribute, updated daily with new customer creations, kind notes, or names of people who meant something. Today, someone had written in pink chalk, "This place tastes like love." As the dinner hour approached and the light shifted to gold, Keanu stepped outside to stretch his legs. The crowd inside buzzed with life. He crossed his arms and looked back at the bakery. The windows glowed, the music floated, and every time the door opened, another piece of his aunt's dream stepped forward. Maria joined him a few minutes later. "They're still watching," she said gently, nodding across the street. Keanu followed her gaze. Chad and Kyle sat by their empty window. The contrast was impossible to ignore. A small line had formed outside Everglow again. 0 customers stood at theirs. "They're stuck," she said. "Bailey chose that," Keanu replied. "Now they get to live with it." Maria didn't respond, only tilted her head, considering the quiet justice of it all. Then Keanu added softly, "Let them watch." He wasn't angry anymore. He wasn't even bitter. He just knew the truth. Some things are built on shortcuts, but others, the things that matter, are built on time, care, and trust. Everglow had proved which one endured. That evening, the final tray of Mrs. Carter's crumble sold out. Jaime high-fived 2 kids who'd waited for it all day. Maria tied her apron tighter for one last cleaning round. Keanu sat on a stool near the counter, sipping chamomile tea. "Lucia would have loved this," he murmured. He didn't say it to anyone in particular. But Jaime, passing by with a stack of clean plates, heard him and smiled. "She'd be proud of you," Jaime said. Keanu looked up. "Of all of us." The bell over the door rang again. Another customer. Another memory waiting to be made. The chairs were arranged in a circle, just after closing. The lights were dim and the last customer had long since gone home. Jaime stacked the last stool while Maria wiped down the counters. Mrs. Carter finished her tally and placed the ledger in the safe. The smell of cinnamon still hung in the air, warm and comforting. Keanu stood in the center of the room, holding something folded and fragile in both hands. He looked at everyone, his team, his family, and nodded. "This," he said quietly, unfolding the paper, was written by my aunt the week before she passed. The parchment was yellowed with time. The handwriting was careful, graceful. He read aloud, "Everglow is not just a bakery. It's a place where broken mornings are healed with warm bread, where tears are caught in coffee cups, where neighbors become friends and friends become family. We serve donuts, yes, but we serve them with memory, love, and laughter. If we ever forget that, close the doors." The room went still. Keanu looked up and smiled gently. "He left this in the recipe box. I found it when I came back through the old files, and I realized we almost lost all of this because we forgot why it mattered." Maria's eyes shimmered. Helen nodded silently. Keanu looked around the circle. "I don't want to be the only one who remembers," he said. "So, what does Everglow mean to you?" He stepped back and took a seat. The circle opened. Maria was the first to speak. "I came here after my husband left," she said, voice steady. "I was lost. I didn't know who I was anymore. Lucia, your aunt, hired me without asking questions. She just handed me an apron and said, 'Start with the dough.' She gave me a reason to keep going. Now, I get to do the same for others." Jaime cleared his throat, looking nervous. "I used to think I'd just be another kid stuck behind a register, but this place, it taught me what leadership looks like. It taught me that I'm not too young to care." He looked at Keanu and smiled. "Thank you for trusting me." Helen folded her hands. "I've worked in finance offices and payroll departments all over the city. This was the only job where people actually remembered my name, and not because I signed their checks, because they knew I was part of something." More voices followed. A part-time baker shared how Everglow had helped her get through nursing school. A dishwasher said he met his girlfriend here. A barista, new to the team, said she'd never worked in a place where people hugged at the start of their shift. Then it was Keanu's turn again. He held the mission letter to his chest for a moment before folding it and placing it on the counter. "My aunt saved me more times than I can count," he said. "When I didn't know where I belonged, this place always welcomed me. I bought it so I wouldn't lose that feeling." He paused. "But somewhere along the way, I let distance do the damage. I thought handing over the keys would be enough. It wasn't. You have to show up for the things you love." He looked at every face in the room. "Thank you for showing up." The group sat together in silence for a moment. It wasn't heavy. It was warm, peaceful, the kind of silence that only comes when hearts feel full. Keanu stood and walked behind the counter. He placed his aunt's mission letter inside a small frame and gently set it next to the register, right where she used to keep her handwritten order pad. He turned back to the team. "We keep this here," he said. "Not for the customers, for us." They all nodded. Maria gathered the empty coffee mugs. Jaime took down the closed sign and began wiping down the glass. Helen adjusted the chairs and double-checked the lock on the safe. No one rushed, no one complained. Everyone moved like they belonged to the moment. Keanu walked to the front door, keys in hand. The smell of fresh cinnamon still lingered. A breeze moved through the small window crack. The chalkboard wall by the door was now full. Dozens of names, memories, and stories, scrawled in different colors. A child's message stood out near the bottom. "When I grow up, I want to make smiles like Everglow." Keanu smiled. He turned the key slowly, locking the door. The bell above the door gave a soft, familiar chime. Behind him, someone began humming an old tune Lucia used to play on the radio, the kind that didn't need lyrics to carry meaning, just rhythm, memory, and heart. Keanu turned off the lights, leaving only the warm kitchen glow behind the swinging door. Before stepping out, he looked back one last time. The tables were clean. The air was sweet. The place breathed with life. Everglow wasn't just saved. It had come back brighter. As he stepped outside, the stars were just beginning to show. The street was quiet, save for a few late-night stragglers. He zipped up his jacket and started walking toward his bike parked by the corner. Tomorrow, they'd start early again. New dough to prep, more coffee to brew, stories waiting to be heard. But tonight, the work was done, and something real had been restored. Final call to action. If this incredible story reminded you of the value of truth, legacy, and second chances, don't forget to subscribe and share it with someone who still believes in goodness. What would your flavor be on the community batch? Tell us in the comments.